Now, the Pi module database is something that every Pi server since Pi version 3.3 has shipped, and it's used to, well, I guess the best way to describe it is the way I've heard Pat Kennedy, our founder, describe it. He says we needed to hang things off of equipment. So if you have a tank or a vessel of some type, typically you would hang things like Pi tags to say, okay, this is a tag that's associated with that vessel. But then there's other things as well. There's, for example, the height or the width of a column. There's the equipment that it uses, the last time it was maintained. Those are the types of things that you might want to associate with a vessel, with a piece of equipment. In fact, this began as something we called the equipment database. It's a type of asset database. And let me show you what it looks like. So I go over to the System Management Tools. Here's a viewer into the module database. If I go into My Pulp Company, this describes two digesters, digester 1 and digester 2, and each one has aliases that point to the pressure and the temperature associated with those digesters. These aliases, in fact, point to Pi tags. Okay. In addition, there are other things that we could hang off of that. We could hang things that are not Pi tags, that are just simply static values, and those we would call properties. So the point of having this kind of a tree structure is now, if I'm a user and if I need to see the temperature in digester 2, I don't need to remember that the temperature in digester 2 is equal to this tag. All I need to do is have a graphical user interface where I can drill down through My Pulp Company to this digester and then find the alias called temperature. So that's just a very brief overview. We'll take a look more at that in just a few minutes. So some of the other terms that we'll use with this is context. So the path that we take to a certain area is called a context. And one of the nicer things about using context and alias is if the context changes, if you change from one unit or digester or one plant to another, all the referenced Pi points that are referenced by those aliases are going to change without having to search again for their tag names. So we can make real good use of this from within a display, for example. So I'm actually going to jump forward a few slides here. So I'd like to show you exactly what we're talking about with that. See, I could create a process book display in which we simply make that display relative to the reactor that we're looking at. So the user, all he would have to do is figure out what is the name of the reactor and what is the name of the alias that he's interested in, and then we will convert that and determine what the Pi tag is. So as you switch from one reactor to another, if I switch over to reactor 3, if we're still looking for temperature, now we're bringing in a different tag, and your process book display can automatically update to show that tag. Each one of these things that you see right here are called modules. And if I drill down through these, you can see, as you can see, there are modules within modules available. So these are all the different pumps, and finally terminating at specific aliases and properties. So modules make up the module database. They create the tree structure. Okay. Each module in turn has a lot of things we can hang off of it. Again, using that analogy that it's kind of like a tree structure. You organize things logically or geographically or by brand name or by date or by equipment manufacturer or anything you want. You configure the structure yourself, and then you start hanging things off of it. So for example, you can hang properties such as the installation date or the vendor or the product ID, etc. You can also hang aliases off this. Now again, let's go back to our example. Let's drill down and look at this. So if I look in my equipment library among the pumps, I can find a number of properties like, for example, the impeller diameter, okay, and the model number and the last service date. And each one of these has that information. Well, I spoke too soon. That one doesn't. Let's take a look at this. Each one has an impeller diameter and a model number, etc. There are two different configuration tools you can use for the module database. First is a graphical user interface called the Module Database Editor. and that's part of the system management tools. I can go through here and one at a time I can create new modules. I can modify existing aliases, etc. if you're logged on with the right privileges. So this is where you can go in and create and modify modules. Now that's not going to work very well if you've got thousands and thousands of structures to work with. So we do have a better technique, and that is to use this system management tool add-in to the to Excel. So for example, under PI SMT Module Database Builder, I can import module database structures, copy and paste, edit the items, export them back out to Pi. So for example, here you can see all the definitions of that pump example we were using, including things like the different aliases or properties that we're passing as arguments. So those are the configuration options. Now, the question that comes up all the time, of course, with module database is why would you bother to use it? We hear some customers say, you know, I don't have that many things where, you know, I can say that I can make module relative displays or module relative spreadsheets, you know, where I have 5 tanks that are identical, just the tank names are changed. No, that's not true. That's probably true. Very few people have large devices like that. But the module database isn't always only used just for making things that are relative to modules for navigation purposes. You can use it, of course, for navigation purposes, in which, for example, you would have as a property of a module in the module database, you would actually have a website. So you can use it for simple web navigation like that. We did not see an example of that in our demos so far. And another thing you can use it for is to send aliases to other web parts. Now that's something that we did see demonstrated. If you recall, the idea was when you click on one of these objects, one of these modules, it's going to send all the full list of aliases within that, organized within that module, out to a trend web part, for example. So we saw that earlier when we were looking at this example. As I switch from one module to the next, switching one module to the next is going to force a new set of tags that are aliases in the module database. It's going to force that over to the trend web part, as you're seeing right there. And one more mechanism that we've actually seen already is when you send properties from one web part to the other. So in this case, I've sent a whole list of aliases. Now let me minimize that and show you again this. This is a document library, and in this case we're not sending a list of aliases, we're sending the name of the module itself. So we're using that as a filter for the document library. So as you can see, each time I switch from one alias to the next or from one node to the next, we get a new set of operating instructions to take a look at from this document library. So those are some of the things that people do with the module database and this TreeView web part, and we'll go over a few more at the end of this chapter.